And not to make it scarce.
Welcome everyone. It's, what is today, May 28th. It's the Region 64 Supper Club. We have tonight a debate on the legitimacy of copyright as property, or put another way, whether or not should libertarians consider copyright defined as a limited right for authors to protect their expressions. Right here. As a property right that's enforceable against people who haven't entered into a contract, on that basis. So that's the basic premise. Libertarians are known as debating. We're debating, so this is a great chance to do it. Now, the rules of debate are as follows. We'll flip a coin. Anyone have a coin? So we'll flip a coin to see who gets, okay. So, who gets to go first? So, Forrest, you want to call it in the air?
I'll go ahead.
Yeah, well, that looks like tails to me. That's tails, right?
I have that.
Okay. So, I suppose it's like football, you get to choose whether you go first or not.
I'm okay going first.
Okay, so you go first, you get 3 minutes. Forrest will have 3 minutes rebuttal. And then you'll have a chance to ask a question. You get a minute to formulate a question, 3-minute response, 3-minute rebuttal, then it goes to the other person. We'll go back and forth for as long as it's fun. When you're done asking questions, you can have, a reasonable amount of time, 5 minutes or so, to sort of wrap it up. It's all on tape, but I'll be on Terry's YouTube, which if you're watching this means you're already there, so I don't have to give you the address. Is that correct?
So structurally, at what point, if I start out on the defensive line, do I get to make my 6-minute presentation of my position? Is it after we exhaust the question back and forth?
Yeah, after you'll get an opening statement, and then you'll get your opening statement.
Oh, okay.
Right, so you both have opening statements, and then you'll do closing statements in reverse order. So you'll start the first closing statement, you'll get the last. So is that
We
clear?
just have to keep us in line.
I'll do my best. I'll be kind of keeping track of time, and since I have a mic, I'll just cut you off. Go here.
Just pull the plug on Mayhem.
Okay, so as I was looking last night in my very last minute preparation for this debate at the history of copyright, I found that a lot of it pertained to governmental systems of control. And I'm going to reveal that I'm an anarchist here, and I don't like these systems of control. Not that having such a system means that copyright is completely illegitimate, but I think the desire to use it as a system of control should draw a lot of our suspicions. I noticed that in order to establish copyright, government constantly intervenes in the market and prevents people from using their own property to generate copies of other people's work. And I consider that a gross interference in what would otherwise be a free market without the government intervention. I noticed also I encountered utilitarian arguments that through copyright we can establish a higher means of productivity of creative works, and I consider that a utilitarian argument that really needs to have a burden of proof met in order to become a reasonable governmental policy. I noticed that even without the incentives that a copyright monopoly would give a creative artist, even without those incentives, people have been creating many things historically, and I see no reason for them to ever stop creating and I also want to question the incentives of copyright itself. So the creative author gets a short-term monopoly on the right to be the sole reproducer of their work. But having a monopoly, or even just giving the author a bunch of money, doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's going to be creative. Right? So I could give you $1 billion, but it doesn't mean that your ideas are $1 billion better than they used to be.
30 seconds.
And I noticed the government intervention in this desire to protect the work of an artist. It's an intangible good, because I can't put my finger on a piece of work, even though I can put my finger on a book. And the desire to protect the intangible good has ramifications in tangible goods. We're going to put people in prison or break their printing press or things like that.
Okay, time's up.
So I ask a question.
You get 3 minutes to give an opening statement, and then it'll be Eric's turn to ask a question.
Okay.
You got to turn on your mic.
It is on. I'm not sure it's. I think I'll switch.
Give me some more volume.
Okay. Well, thank you for having the debate. I think it's really important to be able to defend one's ideas vigorously against other ideas, or else they become dogmatic, and we say things and we think we mean them, but if we can't defend them, then they don't really have the same weight. And so I do appreciate that. I just want to state that real quick. The act of forming a new and unique creative work takes mental and physical exertion. You put work into something creative, and that creates a thing. And that thing has a value. And the way that we know that it has a value is because other people desire that thing that you just created. If someone has created something that is of value, they have created value in the marketplace, I guess the question that I have is, who should be assigned that value? Should it be the government? Should it be the collective? Should it be some company? Or should it be the individual that created it? And it is my position that the most consistently libertarian view of that would be that it would be the individual that retains the value. Because it clearly does have value. You can't say it has no value and therefore it's in the ether. And the reason that I believe that is because when I was first looking into libertarianism, I read a book called Libertarianism in One Lesson, and pretty much the opening paragraph of the book was, if there's one lesson that sums up libertarianism, it is that you own yourself. And the government doesn't own you, corporations don't own you, the collective doesn't own you. So there is an interesting quote from the formation of our Constitution, where American writers were writing to our representatives in the Constitutional Congress, and they said that there's nothing more properly a man's own than the fruit of his study, and that protection and security of literary property would greatly tend to encourage genius and to promote useful discoveries. And so that's basically saying that it is in the interest of liberty that the author maintains
30
the
seconds.
value of their creation, and they can engage in the free market with it.
Do I get to ask questions?
You done for us?
Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, this is a condenser mic, so you gotta like point it at your mouth or pick it up. Not that it matters. I can hear you fine. But...
No, I carry it.
Okay, so now it's question and answer time. So fire away, Eric.
I'm going to need a few seconds to prepare my question.
Okay, you got a minute.
I got a rebuttal, but not completely a question.
It's got to be one sentence, or you forfeit your turn, though.
No pressure.
So he can pretend he's German and that sentence can last for 3 pages, right?
As long as it's a sentence.
As long as I stack the verbs up at the end.
I could forfeit you right there because you just said more than a sentence.
You say that the work that somebody produces is of value, and I want to know exactly what it is that's stolen from them when I make a copy of that work.
Okay, there are 2 issues that deals with, and one has to do with the original copyright law, which was where did I put it? Basically, there's 2 problems with that. Either the government control the value, or other people can control the value. And actually, can you repeat the question?
I just want to know, in the creationism, we recognize that authors have put in work, and we want to give them a reward for that. But what exactly have I taken away from them when I make a copy?
If you make the work widely available, then you change the balance of supply and demand. If I have a work and I want to engage in free market trade with that work, and I want to trade my book for chickens, then that book has a value. But if you come along and you copy my book, then I can't trade it for as many chickens because it's rampant. The original, one of the reasons that we changed the initial copyright law in America from the sort of English version was we added charts and maps when we formed our Constitution, and that was because people were exploring the United States and they were making detailed maps of the different territories and that sort of thing. And then lazy people who are in the city would just copy these maps. They didn't have to invest in scouts and guides and all that sort of thing. They just said, well, yeah, this is a cool map, I'll make it myself. And then in the marketplace, they could sell their maps for the exact same value as the guy who actually put all the work into selling them. So they are dividing the value of his product by simply copying it because it isn't as unique. They did not put the equity into creating it.
Okay, you get a rebuttal here?
I get a rebuttal. Okay, so
To his answer. If you want to, if not, Forrest can, this one's working, this one's...
one of the
I'm Mike Immune.
so under the creationism theory of value,
God didn't make it.
and artist
Man made it.
owns their work because of the labor that they put into it. But I really want to
The mental,
question.
creative, and physical labor they put into it, yes.
Yeah, I really want to question that because if I take some of my own stuff, like a box of clay, and then I mold it into a sculpture, I own the resulting sculpture because I owned the clay and because I owned my labor. So it's the result of things that I already owned. Now, on the other hand, if I were hired to mold a piece of clay into a sculpture, then I no longer own that sculpture. My benefactor does, who paid for the labor and who paid for the clay. If I were to steal your clay and then mold it into a sculpture, who would own the sculpture, me or you? We're going to fight about it, and some kind of legal case is going to come about because it's a little bit questionable then. Because I did expend labor, but I expended labor on goods that were stolen, which probably means I forfeit my labor. In contrast, I don't think that this labor theory of value with creative works really holds up. We've thrown this out in favor of homesteading for physical goods. It's the first one to embroider and use a physical good that owns a physical good. And I just don't see any way of claiming first use or embroidering of an intangible good.
All right, Horace, do you want to ask a question?
In your view, who should gain or control the value of the creation of a new work?
Well, I don't really recognize the new work as independent of the physical things that it was created out of. So it's the owner of the physical goods plus the labor, and then you get a different physical good.
Are you done with your response?
Is that an answer? Who?
Because you can rebut that, you got 3 minutes.
I would say the original owner owns it.
Of a new work?
Yes.
Just so I understand, I'm not trying to break format. If I borrow someone's camera and I take a picture, in your view, they own the picture.
Yes.
But not the collective, not the government, not the society, but whoever owned the original item that it was created with.
Yes. Because you track it with the physical goods.
Okay. Do I keep asking questions or?
You can have a
You
rebuttal.
can rebut if you think that's a loony idea, you can explain why it's loony, or you can let him ask the next question.
I think that leads to an awful lot of problems, and I think that I don't think there's any better argument. I don't think that that's a really solid argument as a better solution for who should own the value of a created good, as tracking back to who happened to own the pen that a writer wrote a poem with, because the poem came out of their head. And you could quibble about who owned the pen, but that was not the actual work. It is not the value of the work. We could argue if you made a great sculpture out of my clay, then maybe we could, come to some settlement where, you want to buy the clay from me now that your sculpture is valuable, or whatever. That's fine. We can sort that out. But the sculpture, in my view, should still be yours, because I didn't create it. It wasn't my genius that made the sculpture. You made it, and you should, to some degree, get that. If I take a picture of someone else's camera, and it's a brilliant picture, and it is valuable to society, then I actually own that picture, as it currently stands. One of the things that came up when Ellen took that big selfie at the Academy Awards was she didn't press the button. It was her camera, but she ended up not actually having the right to sell that picture because she had a guy with a longer arm take the picture. Now he owns the picture. So,
Well, I already disagree with government, so I'm not going to defend their legal cases and settlements.
we decided that there are, from a libertarian perspective, we believe in small government. We don't necessarily believe in no government. There are certain things that are in the social compact that we think, as a collective, we give them the responsibility to handle, and we make sure that they're still answerable to us in a representative democracy. And we felt that copyright was so important that we put it into the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8. Because as a society, there needs to be some agreement for how we handle this. Now, one of the things about libertarianism in general is that a socialist or a communist can live in a libertarian society. The libertarian cannot necessarily live in a communist society because we don't believe in telling people what to do. So you can decide among your community what you want to do with your creative works, and that's totally fine. And I don't really have to interfere in it. But you can't tell me what I have to do with my creative works, because that is an infringement of me as a person.
Given that setting, do you have a theory of how copyright would come about within a totally free market, absent government-granted monopolies?
I do, but the problem is you need somebody to oversee copyright. You could either privatize it or you could have government do it. But someone needs to oversee it, or else you could just basically have rampant theft. Because different people have different values. They're going to see a value in your thing, they're just going to take your thing. Someone has to be there to stop them from taking that thing. And in my opinion, if you have a private organization engaging in protecting the social compact for an entire society, you can call it private, but it's still government. And the problem is it's government that is less answerable to the people than representative government because it's private and it answers to the dollar, not the people.
Okay, so I can rebut that answer, yes? Okay, I think that copyright law would never come out of a free market of voluntary associations because it does require a big overseer and that a large community of people that are voluntarily associating with each other, they would just never uniformly get together and say this is a good idea to do. They would never want to form a giant body that can limit what each individual does with his or her own property.
I think that history would prove otherwise.
Well, no, the history of copyright law comes directly from government and originates in government grants and monopolies to do certain things, specifically print. But it originates from government. So I'm asking, in a society of voluntary associations absent government, how could copyright come about? And I don't think it could.
Well, people are creative and they make new things. And someone has to control the value of that new thing in order for them to engage in the free market. And that someone should be an individual who created it. It is the closest thing to non-government intervention and copyright that you can possibly have while recognizing the value of the product.
No, because people have been creating things since before copyright law existed. So it's not necessary to have copyright law in order to get creative work.
Okay, your turn to ask a question. Your turn to ask a question if you want to.
So I'm supposed to ask a question?
Yeah, you can ask a question because Eric had the last question. There was
Okay.
roughly 6 minutes in that exchange, so call it even.
So, just so I understand, in your version, there would be no oversight of the value of creation granted.
Well, there would be. I don't think that an artist owns the market value of their good. I think that the value comes from the market, and the author of the work has no claim of ownership.
Who can take it to the market?
Well, the author can, or somebody else that sees the work and replicates it.
If the author can take it to the market, then the author has the value of the thing.
Not as complete value, because as soon as they sell one, somebody else can copy it.
But that infringes on that author from a libertarian perspective.
Ask them how authors get paid.
Yeah. Only if the author can make an ownership claim on future sales. So the author would have to take an ownership claim on future customers' money. But that money belongs to the customers, not the author.
Okay. The original copyright law stemmed from, like you were mentioning, the monopolies that were granted to the printing guild by the English royalty. And this was used to control propaganda because a printer couldn't print a book without a license to print that book from the government. If you were an individual and you wanted your book published, you had to go to the government, have them approve the book, and then the government would assign that book to a registry and a printer could print that book. The problem was that loop did not include the original creator of the work. So the printing guild got rich, and the government got to have control of the work, and the individual went poor. So the Statute of Anne was put in place because they wanted to protect the individuals, and the current system where it was licensed to printers was stifling creative work. Nobody wanted to bother making anything new because they weren't going to get paid, and they were going to have the political process of having it go to the government. So that was a recognition that giving the value of the creative work to the individual that created it would promote ideas. It would make writing flourish, it would make books flourish, and that sort of thing. And it had that effect. One of the problems was that that statute applied in England, but it didn't apply in America, which is why we had to write it into our Constitution, but ours is very similar to theirs, as far as saying that in order to promote ideas, in order to promote liberty among the people, and this is the language from the Constitution, that the government should protect copyright, or else it is not worthwhile for creative people to create.
I could almost take that and point out that the Constitution is maybe a copy of what was seen in England?
It was...
An illegitimate copy?
No, because our Constitutional Congress took input and they wrote their own version. And our version was very different. Our version included maps and charts, and our version had different language for how one registered a copyright eventually.
So it's a derivative work.
It is an influence work. And there is a definition of
Well,
derivative work.
I don't really want to get stuck on that little weasel there. But you do point out, historically, prior to the Statute of Anne, there was a printers guild that controlled all the printing of work, and the government authorized their monopoly.
Yes.
They were allowed to go and destroy competing printers' physical goods, their printing shop.
Yep.
So I will grant you the fact that assigning that coming up with this idea that authors own work or have an ownership claim on their work, and that claim is transferable to a printer in order to get a mass production, is a step in the right direction. But I want to take the next step and say that these things aren't ownable in the first place. So intangible goods just cannot be owned. What do I steal from you when I make a copy?
Intangible goods have a value because people desire those intangible goods. And someone with a wider distribution network than I have can steal my work today, put it on their wider distribution network, and they can make massive amounts of money by serving advertising and all of this sort of thing, which is actually detrimental to me. They have rendered the value of that work from me and my control, used it themselves without putting in the sweat equity to create the work, and they're getting rich on it while I am not. And somehow that seems wrong to me.
I'm going to argue contrary-wise, and that the greater visibility of your work actually enhances your value as an artist. It gives you a wider recognition in the public's eyes. It doesn't take from you, it adds.
From a libertarian perspective, that should be my choice.
Is there a right of attribution? Questions from the peanut gallery are allowed. So are you conceding a right of attribution?
I'm not, because a claim to the right of attribution would be a claim on how you are allowed to reproduce my work. If you want to reproduce it under your own name, then I will file a suit of fraud.
So you're fine with the Walmart of books just sucking up every work and then printing out 1 million copies and not letting any author, you're fine with that? No problem.
No problem with that.
Let me be clear.
Yeah, if somebody like Google or whatever wants to suck up all the books and make them widely available to everybody, I have no problem with that.
And change the name of the authors to Walmart Incorporated or Google Inc.
Now,
No problem with that.
if they change the name of the authors, I have a problem with that insofar as we can prosecute that with fraud, not copyright.
I sense the right of attribution in there.
Are we going to have a chance to ask questions at some point?
You can shout questions from the peanut gallery, I suppose.
But lost revenue isn't
We have a small
the death of an
crowd.
artist, it's obscurity. So artists should be happy to have their work replicated.
That's not true. Okay, one issue that I want to, and it's related to this, one issue that I wanted to discuss is that one of the attacks that libertarians frequently encounter from other parties, people who are loyal to other parties, is that we're very greedy. That we think that if we should control our own wealth, that we will choose to not use it for the betterment of our society, and that we must be forced to contribute it for the betterment of our society. As libertarians, we tend to believe in charity hospitals and being able to individually help out the people that are, down and out on our street. And the government thinks, you're not going to do that, we'll do it for you. And giving the individual control of the value of their work is consistent, in my opinion, to the libertarian individual controlling their own wealth. And that to argue that their work should be out in the collective unprotected is to argue that your wealth should be out in the collective unprotected. And that, to me, is kind of ultimately communist. It is very, I only make the work for the betterment of my society, and hopefully it reflects well on me. Now the thing is, also, in our current system, there are actually plenty of ways to share your work, if you want to. I come out of a publishing background, and whenever we made a good publication, we would register it with the Library of Congress. So people can access that work, but they can't use that work in a commercial sense. They can't resell that work. So I'm not depriving society of my contribution. I'm just depriving them of the ability to revalue it, if that makes sense. And there are plenty of ways for songwriters to put songs on the radio and get residuals. And so there's ways to share work that are not as grasping as the presentation of just, if you have it, then you're not going to share it when everybody wants it. So.
Earlier you had said that libertarians like to have a world where some people are free, where people are free to opt in or opt out of stuff at their whim. And when you talk about how artists today have many different streams of revenue, essentially.
They have options for distribution.
Options for distribution.
If someone contributes code to an open source collective code project, they're not necessarily going to get paid. They might get recognition.
Right.
If I put my photos on the internet, I might get recognition, but I might not get paid. But I can choose to do that. I can also choose to not let Toyota use my picture, but I can give it to normal people for free.
Right. So my question is, suppose that I produce a piece of work and I want to divest myself of the copyright attached to it. Am I able to do that?
Absolutely.
And
you have many options available to you.
In a matter of fact, no. I'm not able to do that because the Berne Convention, which first the Constitution automatically grants me copyright to any work that I produce, whether I want it or not.
The United States version of the Berne Convention does not recognize an artist's moral connection to their work.
No, but it recognizes the artist's copyright connection.
But I can wholesale buy that work from you.
but I don't want to sell it. I don't want it to be ownable. And the government doesn't recognize that option.
You don't have to register it. You don't have to give it to anyone.
It's automatically registered as copyright. This isn't a patent. It's copyright. And so it's automatic. And there isn't any way that I can get rid of that.
You can license it. You
What?
can license it. Like under
He's
free
saying,
license.
he's saying without any effort on his part, he can't lose control of the work that he's made.
He's correct. yeah.
But even with a license, I get a different form of control. I don't divest.
You
No,
can use Creative Commons.
With Creative Commons, I get a different form of copyright, which has different protections attached to it, but I don't divest.
you do.
With Creative Commons, you can say, I make no claim on it. Anyone can do whatever the heck they feel like.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Just ask, don't be so polite.
Okay,
He's doing the couple. Go ahead.
first of all, and Eric, I have a real problem, with why anarchists wouldn't see it this way. But you're talking
whenever you
about
see
a
them
problem
laws,
with
yeah.
implementation of a government policy. How
Yes.
does that affect an inherent right?
because,
And I have to
because my argument is you can't have this right without such implementation.
Oh, I disagree.
The-
These rights are inherent.
I disagree. I think
Okay.
these rights are from government. These
Well,
rights are government
well, that's the
created.
whole debate here.
They're not natural
That's
rights.
the whole debate here. Is it inherent or not? So whether or not the government has a good policy to protect inherent rights is a separate issue from whether we have inherent rights, is it not?
Having inherent rights is definitely separate from government policies surrounding those rights.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
have a question. Certain people keep speaking of copyright as if it is a kind of property. But all other property, for example, that particular carpet, is perpetual. If this were my carpet, I could pass it on in perpetuity. My great, whatever grandchildren could own that carpet. And the same is true for land. We recognize this claim as a perpetual claim. If copyright is truly a property claim, why isn't it perpetual?
Unlike natural rights, copyright expires.
Well, but natural rights do expire also, because there's something called the statute against perpetuities. You cannot, in your will, say this land will forever be devoted to X. There's a limit to how far down the line you can attach.
I can give this one a shot.
Yeah. So you okay?
The ownership of this
Terry.
carpet or this piece of land never fades away. It never becomes non-owned unless all the owners die.
Or it becomes
Terry.
abandoned. Yeah, that's true.
But hypothetically, there could be a chain of ownership 10,000 years long.
Yeah, you just can't control that chain more than 2 or 3
But we
generations.
specifically sunset this claim to this so-called property of
The
copyright.
copyright on the carpet.
I'm not talking about the copyright, I'm
Listen.
talking about the physical.
No, listen to me. The copyright on the carpet is on the textile design of that carpet. The person who created that carpet can copyright that design. Now they can pass that carpet on to their children, but the design eventually falls into the public domain for the good of the society. Now you can debate when that should happen or if that should happen, but that claim does separate from the physical object. So I can have a copyright to a photo that might be hanging over your fireplace because I shot the photo and I sold you the picture. I can still have the copyright to that photo and it might eventually fall into the public domain. But nobody's going to come to your house and take the picture off the wall because the copyright is on the intellectual property. Carpet isn't intellectual property. The textile is an intellectual property. So that's how it works.
You know, Spooner
Non-responsive?
Whose turn
You know,
is it to ask
Spooner
a question
argued that
now? I
copyright
forgot.
should not expire.
Maybe it's your turn?
Is it my
Want me
turn?
to ask a question?
In your view of how things happen, how do you prevent mob rule? How do you prevent the creator of something valuable from just being wholesale mugged by someone who wants the value of that thing?
Well, if I happen to own a large amount of cash in my wallet that I didn't create, it's not up to some kind of law about imaginary goods to prevent somebody from stealing my physical cash. So if I actually do create something, a piece of art or something, and somebody steals it from me, they've stolen physical goods from me, and I can prosecute them under theft for physical goods. But if I keep my physical goods, they have no need to mug me. They just make a replication of those goods.
Didn't your Bitcoins get stolen?
Well, you can't. For technical mathematical reasons, it's very difficult to replicate Bitcoins.
It's a Bilbo Baggins move.
But yes, if somebody figured out how, then it would rather collapse that market. But nothing is stolen from me
But they're not
when somebody makes
physical,
a copy.
but they have value.
They're not physical and they do have market value, yes. But you notice I don't make an ownership claim on the value. I make an ownership claim on the use of the coin, which is a mathematical problem.
Copyright doesn't necessarily mean dollar value. It is a utilitarian issue. So I think that covers it.
I'm really unclear as to what I steal from you when I replicate your work.
When people replicate my work, they make my life harder.
But
Because
so what?
in order to protect my copyright, one of the necessities is that I have to actively protect my copyright. So when someone takes all of my photos that I charge for and puts them on a CD and sells them on eBay, they're diluting the value of my product and making me have to write letters to eBay telling them to take that stuff down because this person is hurting my bottom line. When someone takes all of my photos and they put them on Mega Upload or some other site,
I'm not debating whether or not the market value of the good drops when it's replicated. I'm debating on what are you claiming ownership?
the intellectual property.
How is somebody that's copying work transgressing against you?
When work is created, it takes my mental and physical effort to create something new. They don't have that thing until they take it from me because they didn't have it.
But they don't take it. You still get to use the original.
They do take it.
You get to use the original.
Okay, I have a question. I read an article once. Samuel Clemens, he was the author of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. And when the books came out, they were very successful. And what he did not like, that in certain countries, people were just, we didn't have photocopy then, but they were just copying his books and selling it and making money out of it. And he wasn't getting anything. And that upset him very much. And in certain cases, like Canada used to have a law saying that the author had to go at least once a year physically present in Canada for the copyright to continue. So he had to go there, he had to go to Canada, okay, I'm here one day, and then he went back to the US. So, I mean, what's your opinion on that that these people in other countries, mostly Europe, were just making copies of his books, selling it, and he wasn't getting any value out of it?
Well, his failure as a businessman isn't really my problem. Right, because I'm not up here giving you business advice on different ways that you can generate revenue from your work. I'm just disputing that intangible goods aren't ownable. They're not ownable things.
I have to, please, go right ahead.
Can I take a quick shot at discussing that issue that you brought up? And one of the related issue was the Harry Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, ran into a copyright issue when she realized that people were translating the book and selling it, but she wasn't getting any sort of like kickback on the translation. And when she tried to take them to court for it, it was determined that our law actually did not cover translation as a derivative work. So she was not actually protected and lost the case. And then Congress quickly added translations to our U.S. Statutes for copyright. So that's a related, sometimes you have to react to new situations.
Question.
This smacks of government protectionism.
Okay.
Social compact. Government is there to do something. We believe, as libertarians, in small government, not no government.
Well, that's another argument for another day. Here's a question for you. If I assert a property interest in this specific thing, it exists already. And if I assert a property interest ownership in, say, this hotel, it exists today. The problem I have with copyright is you're asserting ownership not only in what exists today, but in all possible future instances of anything which is sufficiently close to this thing. So that, I agree with you, if you write a book, you own the physical book. You own the data in your computer where you created it. You own the 10,000 copies that you paid a vanity press to create. But that's not the entirety of your claim. What you're saying is, 20 years from now, somebody creates a completely fresh copy, well, you own that too. Or 10 years from now, somebody translates it into Spanish or Urdu or whatever, well, you own that too. This is kind of you're talking about stuff that doesn't even exist. And you're saying, I own this, even though it doesn't exist.
In your first example, the architect of this building copyrights the design of the building. And if 10 years from now, someone builds a building that is so remarkably like this building that someone has a hard time distinguishing between the two, they're going to have a hard time convincing people that they just thought of it off the top of their head and that it was just a natural similarity. And if that is what happened, they have to defend that. Just like someone who came out with a book that's extremely close to my book is going to have to defend that they didn't copy my book. And they could win, and they might not win.
Have you just tried to pass off begging the question as a rational response?
No, I think that to say
You're
that
assuming your conclusion.
coincidental similarities need to be looked into.
Only if you assert the claim.
Okay,
Would-
I have a question. So if I were to produce a children's book, for example, which I want to do,
If you produce a children.
if I do, right, someone should be able to go to FedEx office or Office Depot, make 1,000 copies and just give them away. Just say here.
If they want to use their funds in that manner, and they get from you a copy of the book, then yes, they can replicate it as much as they want.
So, well, not for me, but let's say they go to Amazon.com and they buy Harry Potter, the Sorcerer's Stone. Okay, they can walk down the street to FedEx office, make 1,000 copies and sell them for $1 or give them away.
If they want to use their funds to replicate copies of Harry Potter, they can, yes. I don't see a problem with that.
I have a question. Your very first question, which I thought was a good question, is what is stolen? So, by analogy, I'd like to put together a hypothetical situation and ask you both. Say, for instance, you own a house, and it's not the house you're living in. You're renting it out. The people that are living there move, and before you can find another renter, someone else comes in, homesteads there for, I don't know, a few months, a year, whatever period of time, and then leaves. But leaves the house the same condition they found it. Is anything stolen then? And if so, what? And how does that not, or does that not show the existence of a property right in something intangible?
I'm gonna let Forrest go first.
Good move.
From a copyright perspective, I would say that it would be analogous to someone copying a book, but not really making it super public, because it doesn't actually impact you that much. People infringe on copyright frequently. Sometimes they do it at the photocopier in the library. Sometimes they grab a picture online that they like and they save it to their hard drive. Sometimes they, make a mixtape of like music that they like and that sort of thing. If that use is so incidental that it doesn't really adversely affect the value of the original product, the value of the original house, generally speaking, those people don't get in a lot of trouble. It isn't until they make those things widely available that they become problematic. The original foundation of Napster was predicated on the fair use of songs on CDs. That they felt that if you had a CD, fair use covered your ability to record that song onto your computer and listen to it, because you essentially bought a license to listen to that music. You didn't buy necessarily the physical object. Now, Napster's feeling was that you could store that personal copy of the music in some networked collective. So you're not telling people to steal it, it just happens to be available. And this supposedly doesn't impact the artist. Well, in reality, it did impact artists, both for the positive and the negative. Some artists became wildly more popular because they had songs that were not radio friendly, but college students loved them, and Radiohead got big. And some artists who had more commercially acceptable radio airplayable work felt that that was cutting in significantly to their sales. So it doesn't have to be an adverse impact. It will have an impact if you're widely distributing music. Now, Napster says that they weren't making money off of it, but they sold in 2008 for $121 million. So they made some money off of it. And so I think that there are some gray areas as far as whether or not minor uses that nobody noticed are the end of the world, but I don't think the court's going to treat them like they're the end of the world. So I think the same way that if you call the authorities and you're like, someone slept on my porch for like 2 weeks and they didn't make a mess, go get them. They're going to be like, dude, I got better things to do with my time. So that's sort of the level I think it gets taken care of.
Now with the house that's owned by somebody, but being used by somebody else in an unauthorized way, I noticed there are two things going on. One, the houses are constructed such that they have borders that are widely recognized. So the very existence of the border is a signal that thou shalt not cross.
So do songs. My contention.
You contend that songs have borders. I don't see them.
They look like little peas with a circle around them.
Which is a government invention, so I don't see it.
But I have a question. The gist of this, couldn't you just say almost all property rights have an intangible aspect? But here's my question.
Well, property rights have a subjective aspect.
Okay, well you can develop it. Here's my question. Suppose Terry was talking about, the carpet that you can pass on for generations. It never stops being an object. What about if you owned a perennial petunia that never died, but it was constantly recycling molecules so that, after many years it's made up of completely different stuff, but it's still recognizable as the same petunia. Yeah. Is that not the same as a copyrighted information then? And would that be permitted under your regime, Eric?
Could you now I got questions stacked up here.
Yeah.
So with the house, the occupier of the house has transgressed against the person who owns the house. And we recognize the transgression with, one, they crossed a physical border, and two, the ownership claim that the owner has on the house is that they get to use it whenever and however they like. if they happened to stop by during these 3 months where it was being occupied and noticed, then that would definitely have interfered with their expected use of the house. Now, the fact that they didn't stop by doesn't make it wrong, it just makes the damages less.
Okay, now let's address the order question if you're ready to.
Well, I gotta get to Jake's question now.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
Please.
The fact that a petunia recycles its molecules doesn't, well, it's still a petunia, right? It's still a physical thing.
It's just replicating itself.
Yes.
Isn't it just information?
It is replicating itself, but I mean, you can have ownership of the petunia because there's only the one petunia. I don't see why you would claim its genome or its pattern of arrangement.
Well, isn't genome and pattern arrangement the same thing?
Yeah, but I don't recognize an ownership claim on patterns of matter. I just recognize an ownership claim on the matter. Not the pattern.
Isn't matter all really a pattern when you get right down
Well,
to it?
Yes,
It's
all
not
matter
covered by
is arranged
intellectual
in
property, and
patterns,
it's not
yes.
copyright.
But it's not the pattern you own, it's the matter.
But there is an argument that someone could copyright the
Genome?
genetic design for their special petunia.
Well,
My personal view is that nothing living should be covered by copyright or trademark or patent. That's just my personal view, and I think that will be the way that things eventually evolve, because I think that hasn't been tried enough times. But I think that your petunia is not covered by intellectual property. I'm not.
I got a particular challenge on this one then. In 1995, there was a DVD decryption case that was widely known and actually formed my opinions against copyright.
Okay.
So during that time, DVDs were encrypted. They still are, but it was a different algorithm then. They were encrypted and they had to be decrypted in order to display on television. Some brilliant engineers reverse engineered the decryption algorithm so that they could decrypt any DVD they wanted and copy it. That is a border that they crossed, right? Because that actually took, it's a fence that they had to go over, a hurdle.
They picked the lock on the house.
They picked the lock. But they picked the lock to obtain information that they could then replicate without harming the creator of the work. In what way do they transgress against that creator?
I have a question.
Harm isn't the key.
If you make a property claim on patterns, then when somebody you want to say when somebody replicates the pattern, they've harmed the creator.
They have perfected the creator.
Well, that doesn't matter, because if you're making a property claim, you're prosecuting for transgression.
It depends. If you register your copyright, your trademark, which is an option, you don't have to do it under the Berne Convention, but if you do it, there are specific statutory damages. Whether or not someone causes you harm, there are statutory damages on a
But these are all
person's
government inventions, though. I mean, in what way is this natural? It's not.
Well, it addresses the harm issue that you're talking about.
But-
Why is it harm? It doesn't have to be harm under the current rules.
No, I'm asking you, how is it harm?
I have a question. If somebody takes a stack of bricks and they move them from point A to point B, or if somebody knows something about the law and you ask them a question that you need to know the answer to, or you have somebody, I don't know, help you with a virus you've got on your computer. Basically, knowledge work. Or just work that takes up time. Do you think there's anything that any of those people should get for that, or should they just do those things for you because you need them or want them?
Well, the fact that labor is involved means that you're likely to pay for the labor, or try and do it yourself.
But ideally, would those people just do that because you want it?
So